Hello and welcome to the keynote speech on the future of human rights by Mr. Maina Kiai. My name is Saara Frestadius and I will host the event. This event is produced by KIOS Foundation. KIOS gives funding and support to human rights organizations in South Asia and East Africa. The work that we fund is always planned and implemented by the human rights activists themselves. Our speaker today is a long-time human rights activist from Kenya. He has also served as the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association between 2011 and 2017. Mr. Maina Kiai is a founding director of the Human Rights Watch's Alliance and Partnerships Program. He is also one of the founders of the Kenyan civil society organization Inform Action. Since 2020, he has also been a member of Facebook's Global Oversight Board. The topic of his speech today is the future of human rights in the post-pandemic world. Were we too optimistic about the triumph of human rights? What has changed and how can we defend human rights and civic space together? You can leave comments and questions in the chat and we will have some time for discussion in the end. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Mr. Kiai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, KIOS, for organizing this and for inviting me. I'm glad to be here, even though we're doing this online, which has become part of our lives. We see each other now on camera and on laptops and online and in virtually rather than in real life. And it's a pity we are not meeting together, but hey, that's what life has passed our way. And for those of you who are like me, who are getting very, very tired of Zooming till you can't Zoom anymore, I really hope that we can enjoy this 15, 20, 30 minutes together and we make do with it. So we've got 15 minutes, so let me start. First of all, I think in terms of looking at the future of human rights, I think we've got to start off with where are we headed? And I think we've got to start, therefore, first of all, with the COVID, which is where we're headed at, and what COVID has shown us. It clearly has made huge impacts in the way we live, the way we work, the way we operate. It's brought up its own dynamics in terms of human rights and democracy. We have seen countries becoming very nationalistic, very protective about themselves, keeping people away, using COVID sometimes as a way to keep people away out of their countries. We have seen in some parts of the world as well, where COVID is being used and the reaction to it is securitization. So increased securitization and therefore the shrinking and the closing down of civic space. We have got, secondly, we have got the rise and continuous rise of authoritarianism across the world. Again, that's come not just within COVID, but I think COVID has accelerated it in certain countries, whether it's in India, whether it is in Turkey, whether it is in Brazil, and whether Hungary, you're seeing more and more countries beginning to be much more authoritarian. That's a real dynamic. We have basically also seen democracies in peril, and we've got to figure out this because countries we thought were past the stage of questioning whether they would be democratic or not we're now questioning it. Many people are looking at the United States saying that after the November election, things are going to be better. But while there was a big change at the presidential level, what we're now seeing is reaction by the right wing, by those opposed to democracy, beginning to try and cut down on democratic space by questioning, by reducing, if you wish, the space for elections. The US is the only country that I know that is a democracy that actually believes in suppressing the vote, in reducing the number of people who come. And throughout the US now, you're seeing these moves where Black and brown people are going to have more obstacles to vote, which then has huge impacts on democracy and human rights. We've seen that as well, of course, in Europe. So we've got to understand the first thing we've seen is that the fact that you've been democratic for 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, 600 years, whatever it is not guaranteed that you'll continue being democratic in the future. And I think one of the things we learned from COVID is that this is something we have to deal with. We also learned from this COVID time that sometimes even with successes, there are new challenges emerge because the contestation between those who want democracy, who believe in people and respect people's opinions, whether they are rich, they are poor, they are brown, they are black, they are farmers, whatever they are, and those who don't believe in democracy because they want to have their view superseding everybody else. That contestation continues and will continue, which is why when over the last few years, we've seen the rise of young people coming up on climate change, we have seen again another side coming up and saying, let's try and defeat that. You've seen again the rise of Black Lives Matter in the United States, and the reaction to that is we've got the Proud Boys, and you've got people trying to threaten and steal an election directly. So this contestation will continue, and I think we've just got to be able to understand and accept wherever we are, democracy is not guaranteed, and it takes a lot of work. We have seen inequalities rising, dramatically rising across the world. And I think if somebody wants to explain and understand why perhaps the rise of fascism and nationalism and right-wing and populism, I think the inequalities within countries is a huge issue. People are looking at when you hear Oxfam telling us that 8 men own as much of the world as half the world, own as much as half the world in terms of wealth, then you know we have a huge global problem. So within countries is the dynamic, and also between countries. And this inequalities also explain the rise of migration and people wanting to leave because the countries are not doing well. So if you're going to move forward, you've got to challenge all this. The fifth thing I want to say is the question of rise of corporatism, of corporates, and the rise of what I like to call market fundamentalism over and above everything else. And the idea that the market will change, the market will control. When you have runaway profits and not a concomitant rise of incomes and wages across the world. So shareholders and owners and executives are making tons of money in banks and other places, and the rest of the world is staying where they are. Those things are dangerous for democracy and human rights, and as we go forward. Social media has risen up as a sixth issue around it. It's important. It's good. It's great. It makes us communicate as we're doing now, right? Social media and internet. We can communicate, we can talk, we can meet, but also has its negatives, as we saw with the rise of false news, fake information, whether it's COVID related, whether it's democracy related, whether it's human beings related. So climate change and all those things. So the question now is, where do we go from here? I think the first thing we've got to say is that we've got to be constantly vigilant. And that's a role for each and every one of us as individuals, but also as collectives. And there's nothing more important than us coming together as collectives and understanding that this is a lifelong struggle. It won't happen because Finland is doing well now. There's no guarantee that Finland will be democratic in 10 years, no guarantees. Secondly, we've got to figure out how to lift up and help the youth continue their rise as they have done, whether it's on climate change, Black Lives Matter, protests. I mean, all the protests have happened in the world, which I think is a great thing. That happened in the last 5-6 years, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's Chile, it's South Africa, fees must fall. It is India, the peasants protesting and the farmers protesting. Protests are part of our world, and we've got to encourage them. We've got to say they've got to come through. We also need to focus a lot more on history. We have to understand where we are coming from and getting a more balanced history than we've had. And it's such a nice step to see Germany recently, just a few days ago, acknowledging its role in the genocide of the Herero in Namibia. We have seen this one step. We've got to talk about the issue of colonialism in why people are poor and why they're not democratic, because the colonial experience is an anti-democratic experience. It's a role of minority ruling the majority and getting away with it. So you've got to figure out how that history has to be taught properly. So when we're understanding Africa, understanding Latin America, understanding Asia, let's never forget that role of colonialism in it all. And you've got to also understand the role of racism globally. It is the Western world, the Europe and North America were built on the backs of slave trade and slavery. Slave traders were Europeans, the slave owners were American and Latin and Brazilians and Latin Americans, if you wish. But slave traders were European. The money came from them. So that discussion needs to happen in a frank manner. It's not blaming anybody. It's basically saying, hey, this is the facts that happened. We need to have regulation going forward on corporates. We cannot have runaway capitalism, fundamental capitalism governing our worlds. And that includes for social media like Facebook and Twitter and all on Google and all of them. So the way that's one of the way forwards. Finally, let me turn to the role of Finland. What do I see as Finland's role? First thing is the Swiss have taught us over the last 50, 60, 70 years that you can be a small country and have a very, very important niche. Switzerland was seen for many years as the land of peace and neutrality. Finland can be the land of democracy and human rights. The land that everybody says and touts and says, Finland, small as it is the niche. It is the one perpetuating it, propagating it. It doesn't have to lecture and like way the Americans do. You don't have to lecture. Just do it by yourselves, by making yourselves a niche, by welcoming democracy activists, by welcoming human rights activists. Because one thing I'll tell you after all these years I've been in this work of fighting for democracy and change and human rights is very tiring. And very often you need a break. You just need to get away to be able to get your head to think again. And what lacks for many, many of us is where to go. How do I step out of the struggle just for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, to get my head together, to get energy? A haven. Finland should be the haven. And because your weather is so hostile in the winter, I can assure you people will not come and stay there for 5 years. There'll be very few who will stay for very long because that winter of yours is a special one. So, but it just needs somewhere where you can share with people, talk, get ideas, meet others, and just be able to come through and get your head straight. And that's so making Finland a safe haven, people at risk can come, people can come and think that meetings are held in Finland. Oh, we want a meeting on human rights on a very, very sensitive issue. Let's go to Finland. That's the place it should be. That is very easy to handle. The second thing that Finland can, so it's a matter of soft power. The second thing Finland can do is become the one country that says all its resources in development assistance will go through civil society in the South, in the global South. It's tough, but it's important because without civil society, I can tell you, you cannot have a democracy and human rights. You cannot. Civil society is the engine. It's the one that builds it. And I know many countries think that you can build it top down. I tell you, you build it bottom up. The people themselves get energized. They create the systems, the structures. They then go in and build democracy. Anything coming from the top down is weak. It's always weak. And you know what? We've tried this top down, the state doing things for development assistance. We haven't quite succeeded. So even if Finland puts 70% of its resources into civil society, whether it's in forestry, it's environment, it's human rights, women's rights, put that and say, we're giving civil society these resources, let them build. Let us trust them, that they know what they're doing. So when they call for constitutional change, when they call for a new form of governance, they know what they're doing. So there we go. And then also certainly very, very important is that Finland needs to maintain its vigilance against right-wing, authoritarian tendencies that are emerging across Europe. That's for Finland to do, because you need to be an example. You need to be that shining city on a hill. And that's an important part of the process for me, because if you're not that, then people will not take you seriously when you say we care for human rights and democracy. So the world will need to see Finns being the ones at the forefront of defending democracy and human rights within their own country. And once that is there, then it becomes a lot easier. And so I think that's what I'd like to say, that look, there's a space, a humongous space. There are vacuums right now. The US, the UK, France, Germany, they're all consumed by their own internal issues and confusion. And they also have this so-called strategic interests that countries like Finland do not necessarily have. So Finland is really at a great stage in its life, and it's a great stage in its existence to being that country that people can have pride in. And even the Finns can have pride in. When I know with the Olympics coming up in the summer, as all of us take pride in our countries and we feel good. So maybe there's something that can make, so being the champion of human rights democracy in the world can be something that all Finns can be proud of and be able to then perpetuate and move the processes forward. Thank you very much. I hope I have said enough in 15 minutes that I needed to say.
Thank you, Maina. Very inspirational speech, and thank you for pointing out so many important issues, and also raising quite provocative point of views as well. But we need to get these kind of views out there. I I actually had one question that I wanted to sort of come back to. You talked about the role of Finland and you talked about the role of civil society. However, would you have anything like very specific things that you could mention that a Finnish citizen could do? How can I support human rights? What can I do?
That's a good question. I think at individual level, I think it's partly, first of all, we can build alliances between civil society organizations in the South with Finnish organizations or Finnish individuals. You can become like, they have this thing they call sister cities, for example, where cities merge with others and they help each other and they have exchanges. So one thing that Finns can do is have sister organizations that they work with without you being without being a funder. But also going and volunteering sometimes in those countries. Go volunteer. You're a good writer. You're good in IT. You're good in fundraising. You're good in strategizing. Go and volunteer for 6 months with a civil society organization that's doing democracy and human rights. That's something you can do that will give you, first of all, give you a lot of fulfillment that also will help and work and gives that exchange, that human exchange. I think is the most important. I say this because I think the best thing that people do across the world is when they have human contact. And yes, it's tough now with Corona, but human contact is what makes us grow. So conferences, we can go to conferences in real life and talk and talk and talk. But some of the most important discussions are those done during the coffee break, the health break. You're sitting outside and just talking and people are just having a chat and you learn so much, but you also get affinity to something and you say, I like this, I'm going to learn from this. And so the other part of it is a sense of humility. The Finns, even though they are a very, very developed country, they're doing so well in education and all the indicators from UNDP, Finland is up there. A bit of humility to understand that it's a matter of fate. Nobody chooses their geography. And the geography that chose you to be in Finland is not your choice. You're there. So, hey, how can you take advantage of it? So we like to say that that we have to, once you're privileged, you need to share that privilege with as many people as you can.
That's an excellent point. Sort of that wider solidarity between humans globally, and really you're really challenging now all of us to become activists and really using our whatever the talent is for the common good.
Because we all are activists. Activism is not one form. There are many forms. If we care about society, if we care about life, we care about ideals, then we can be activists in very many ways. Academics are activists, writers are activists. There's so many ways, So we need to fulfill them all,
That's an excellent point, because you don't necessarily consider yourself to be an activist if you are not out there in the front line. But that's true. That's very good to remind all of us of this. I have to go back to your very big point about development cooperation, cooperation, and how you would see that it should be channeled through civil society fully. Do you see some kind of role for example, multilateral organizations? And so I'm sure there is something that you can say about that as well.
Oh, yes, Saara. The last time I was in Finland in 2015, I talked about this same issue about multilateralism when I was Special Rapporteur, and I made a very strong point that Finland should not give any money to UNDP for democracy and human rights. And UNDP got so mad at me, thinking that they tried to fight back. I still hold that view. Human rights and democracy is done on the ground. It's done by people on the ground. The UN comes with a lot of bureaucracy. People think it's a great place. So if you're going to work on at the multilateral level, let's work at places that do not weaken civil society. UNDP weakens civil society half the time, not just their rules, just their format, because UNDP is an organization that works with government. So if you need to work with government, then yes, you can work with UNDP government to government, or you can work with, but when you want to work with civil society, please do not work with UNDP. Do not work with the UN. UN does not know how to work with civil society. It's a state body. So they are not very good at it and they don't do well. So multilateralism is good. On environment, I think it's great to push for this vaccine for intellectual property rules to be suspended around the COVID vaccine. That's important to work with, the multilateral. But it's what will make Finland more powerful and more more influential at the multilateral level is when other countries feel they can work with Finland. Finland is a good person, it's a good country to work with. So again, yes, there's some, I must say, I mean, I will tell you, because there's some very good UN agencies. I think UNHCR has done some bit of good with refugees, for example. It could do better, but I think UNDP for me is one of the most difficult, and it's most difficult because it's so big and tries to do everything. OHCHR, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is actually quite good on the ground, and that's something to work with to make them more innovative and less fearful. But always figure out where is the best place. What is the role of these UN agencies? Do not let these UN agencies be the ones that are channeling you to civil society and to the people. UN agencies work with the state, let them work with the state. But for civil society, it's hard work, it's many groups, it's tedious, sometimes it can be very frustrating, but it's the only way to get proper results that you want. Otherwise, you're throwing away money, to be honest. If you think that UNDP is a channel that will make sure that civil society is strong in Uganda, you're wasting your money.
We actually have a question now from the audience, and somebody was asking that, do you see that the pandemic has had any positive side effects on human rights?
Oh, that's a hard one, I think. I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. And thank you, whoever is the audience, for listening in, because we think where I am, I only think it's Sarah and I who are talking, nobody else is here. But there are positive impacts of the pandemic. I don't know. I mean, so I suppose they are, because they have. Yes, they have. We've been able to reach out to each other much more easily online, which we weren't doing before. So we've reached out. I mean, it's gone overboard now, because now we only talk online, and each of us talks to a vacuum, and you don't even know who you're actually talking to. You don't get much warmth. But yes, it's made us reach out much better to each other than we did before. And everywhere you go, you'll find Zoom in Nepal, you'll find Zoom in Burkina Faso. So everybody is doing this and reaching out much better. So that's been good. I think the pandemic probably has brought us, because we haven't been able to travel, maybe it's had an impact on reducing the environmental, on global warming that happens there. The carbon footprint has been reduced to some extent. So I think, yes, there's some things there, but I think all in all, it's made us very lonely as well. I mean, I think for us doing human rights, who do human rights, we become very, very lonely, because you work by yourself, you talk on Zoom, and you're not sure whether you're getting through or not. And that human contact that makes this work so fulfilling is not there anymore. And I think that's been, at least for me, speaking personally, lack of that human contact has been quite difficult. But it's also led to innovations. I've got colleagues in the program I work with, Alliance and the Global Alliances and Partnerships, who are working very well online in Georgia and other places, doing online work that's done very well. So innovation has happened, I think, to some extent, and for those who are able to work with it, and other places not so well. But hey, whatever we look at it, it's been the reality, and we can't help that. It's been the reality. Hopefully we never do this again in our lifetimes, and that we never go through this again, and that we can come to a place where now we'll be able to marry Zooming with in real life IRL IRL meetings and connections.
Yes, I agree totally with this. We had another question from the audience. Somebody wanted to ask more about how can we fight corporate capture?
That one is, we have to build. There's corporate culture. The corporate market fundamentalism can only be fought when people organize themselves. It can't be done by individuals. It's got to be done, first of all, nationally, sometimes corporate by corporate on the ground, whatever corporate is doing, and then do it nationally and then do it globally. But you've got to find ways to organize. We've got to rebuild trade unions. We've got to find a way to, because the most significant control and check on corporate fundamentalism was always trade unions. But trade unions have gone have gotten smaller and weaker in many parts of the world. So how we then bring back and make them stronger, because it's got to be that, and then you have to regulate. You've got to fight at legislation level to make sure that corporates are not just about the shareholders and the executives, but they're also about the stakeholders, the workers who work in that corporate. It's about the consumers. Look, all the things we see that are bad from, consumer organizations have helped, no doubt. They've helped when they show bad things, some of the consumer weaknesses. But oftentimes there are cases I know of here in the United States where corporates will deliberately push the opioids, knowing exactly what danger and addiction that has got, and they push it, and they basically reckon, if we do this for 10 years, we'll make this amount of money. When we get caught, we'll pay a fine, and the fine is probably about 1/5 of the profits they have made. It's a dirty calculation, but it works because nobody is there to watch them. We saw that issue of Boeing with a 737 MAX. Boeing knew that the plane wasn't in top form, but they didn't bother to tell us because they could get away with it. They know the regulator, FAA, the Federal Aviation Agency, was working with Boeing and letting Boeing be the ones doing the inspection. So you've got to have better regulations at the state, at the national level of the state, but also perhaps even internationally. So the human rights and business area needs to move from being a voluntary thing for companies into something compulsory, that companies are mandatorily, they're compelled to respect human rights, they're compelled to do proper human rights assessment, they're compelled to look at the impact of what they're doing, and that consumers and people, the stakeholders, the so-called beneficiaries, have a role in how corporates are running. Not running it all, but at least can raise issues and find a way to hold corporates accountable. Without that, we are going to be in deep trouble. I mean, look, it's not this rise of corporate fundamentalism, by the way, isn't an old rise. It started basically with the end of the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War in 1990. So we all focus so much on the end of the Soviet Union, on the rise of freedom and political rights. We forgot that at the same time we were doing that, the companies and their people were also deregulating. And Reagan, Thatcher, and them did so much work in deregulation to make corporates bigger. So now it's easy. The Swiss have been involved in some of this, bad things happening around the corporates. Of course, the extractives are the biggest ones. And you've got to have a rule, for example, that if a Finnish company is causing damage in a country, say in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, then it can be held accountable in Finland, because Congo's rules and legal systems are so weak, but they can be held accountable in Finland and be made to pay back there. So once you begin opening these structures of accountability and that are strong, I think we'll move a great way ahead.
Since we have only a few minutes left, I would like to just ask you one final question, sort of just to summarize the talk. And what would be the most crucial human rights issues that we need to concentrate now, utmost important issues after the pandemic?
I think the simplest way of putting it is that we've got to work better in linking economic and social rights issues with civil and political rights and democracy. They have got to be linked better. That's got to be the one or you've got to get rid of our silos where I work on women's rights and I work on environmental, and we've got to get this community of activists and people working on broad human rights together. But singularly as thematic issues, I think the most important are the inequalities, and the inequalities in the world is a significant issue within country and between countries. Environment and climate change has to be dealt with in a form. And all these things, of course, then affect things like migration, they affect civil and political rights. And then we've got to also think about democracy and the pursuit of democracy and being eternally vigilant, building civil society, because the Finns will not solve the problems of democracy in Kenya. That will be solved by Kenyans. But we would like your help. We would like to work with you, and we would like you to support us. But it's our problem, just like your problems will be solved by the Finns, not by us in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Maina Kiai, for this inspiring speech. I'm sure there is audience around Finland and around the world who have been inspired by your talk.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this.